You are driving home on a perfectly normal Tuesday. The radio is playing, you are thinking about what to make for dinner, you are completely at peace with the world. And then, out of nowhere, a black sedan swerves across 2 lanes, cuts you off so closely you have to slam on the brakes, and the driver actually has the nerve to roll down his window and flip you off as he speeds away. Notice what happens to your body in that exact second. Your heart rate violently spikes. Your grip on the steering wheel tightens until your knuckles turn white. Your breathing gets shallow, your face flushes, and for about 5 to 10 seconds, you are consumed by a pure, unadulterated desire to chase that car down and ruin that person's entire life. It passes, of course. You take a breath, you mutter something under your breath, and you drive home. No harm done. But here is a question nobody actually asks. Why does your body react to a minor social insult with the exact same chemical cocktail it uses to prepare you for mortal combat? And more importantly, what if you felt that exact same flash of rage, but you were standing by a fire? It is 50,000 years before now, and there is no traffic, no police, no judge, and no 911 to call. And this is where it gets interesting. Not as in, oh, ancient people were savages who just hit each other with clubs. That is the cartoon version of history. We are talking about the actual mechanics of survival. How did a tribal society deal with an insult, a stolen tool, or a murder without a state to enforce the rules? What if we are wrong to think that revenge is just a toxic emotion? What if, for the vast majority of human history, vengeance was the only thing keeping society from collapsing entirely? But if that is true, then how did we ever stop? How did humanity survive its own anger without wiping itself off the face of the earth? Buckle up, because this is the rabbit hole we are going down today. Let's start at the very beginning. Where does the urge to get even actually come from? Let's start with the most obvious thing. You probably think revenge is a uniquely human concept. We write epic plays about it. We make multi-million-dollar action movies about it. We treat it like this complex Shakespearean drama. But to evolutionary biologists, revenge is not a human invention at all. It is biology. Back in the 1970s, the legendary primatologist Frans de Waal spent thousands of hours observing a captive colony of chimpanzees at the Arnhem Zoo in the Netherlands. And what he documented completely shattered our understanding of the animal mind. He found that if a dominant chimp attacked a lower-ranking chimp over a piece of fruit, the victim rarely fought back in the moment. The physics just did not make sense. They would lose. But the victim did not forget. They held on to the slight. Hours, sometimes days later, when the dominant chimp's back was turned, or when they were asleep, the victim would suddenly strike. But here is the part that still gives researchers chills. Often, the victim wouldn't even attack the dominant chimp who originally hurt them. They would attack the dominant chimp's favorite grooming partner, or even their younger sibling. Let that land. They were intentionally inflicting emotional and social pain to balance an invisible ledger. You'll say, well, that is just displaced aggression. They are just mad and lashing out at whoever is nearby. Okay, then explain why scientists have observed this exact same behavior in rhesus macaques, where the retaliation is so mathematically precise that the macaques will specifically target the kin of their attacker, completely ignoring unrelated monkeys who are closer and easier to hit. They know exactly what they are doing. This is an evolutionary strategy, and it is called deterrence. In a world without a police force, your physical safety depends entirely on your reputation. If someone steals your food or strikes you and you do nothing, you have just broadcast a terrifying message to the rest of the jungle. I am free resources. Come take what you want. But if you hold a grudge, if you guarantee that any slight against you will be repaid with interest, no matter how long it takes, you build an invisible wall around yourself. Revenge is not a glitch in the system. For our distant ancestors, revenge was the security system. So here is where the story takes a sharp turn from the jungle to the campfire. Fast forward to early human hunter-gatherer bands. We are talking about groups of maybe 50 to 150 people. Everyone knows everyone. You depend on these people to hunt, to gather, to survive the winter. In this environment, the math of revenge changes completely, because the concept of the individual basically did not exist. You were not John. You were the son of the Bear Clan. the nephew of the river people. Your identity was entirely porous, bleeding into the identities of your family members. The anthropologist Christopher Boehm, who spent years studying tribal societies and the concept of blood revenge, noted a terrifying universal rule among stateless peoples: vicarious liability. If a man from Clan A kills a man from Clan B does not need to hunt down the specific murderer. Any male member of Clan A will do. A brother, a cousin, an uncle. The blood of the clan is viewed as one single shared reservoir. You spilled a pint of our blood, we will spill a pint of yours, and we honestly do not care whose veins it comes out of. Sounds completely insane to our modern ears, right? To punish an innocent cousin for a murder he had nothing to do with. But think about the chilling logic behind it. If the punishment for murder falls only on the murderer, then a truly psychotic or violent individual might just take his chances. He might not care if he dies. But if he knows that his actions will put a target on the back of his beloved brother, his aging father, and his own children, he is forced to hesitate. The whole family becomes a policing unit. If you have a hot-headed cousin who keeps starting fights, you are going to physically restrain him yourself because his bad temper could literally get you killed. This is why anthropologists note a massive paradox in human history. Heavily armed, stateless societies are incredibly polite because everyone knows that a raised voice, a spilled drink, or a stolen foraging basket could trigger a war that lasts 3 generations. But what happens when the politeness breaks? What happens when somebody does cross the line and the biological alarm bell of revenge goes off? Let me throw you something even wilder. We do not have to guess what this looked like in the Stone Age, because this exact psychological software survived almost intact into the modern era. If you want to understand the true anatomy of a blood feud, you have to look at the mountains of northern Albania and a document known as the Kanun of Leke Dukajini. This was a set of customary laws passed down orally for centuries before being written down around the 15th century. It governed every aspect of life in the isolated mountain villages where the authority of kings or empires simply could not reach. And the core of the Kanun was the concept of jakmarja, which translates to blood-taking. Under the Kanun, a man's honor was the only currency that mattered. If you insulted a man, if you violated his hospitality, or if you killed a member of his family, his blood was said to be boiling. And according to the rules, the only thing that could cool the blood was a reciprocal killing. But this wasn't chaotic violence. It was practically a religion. Let's say 2 neighbors argue over a property boundary. The argument escalates. One man pulls a knife and kills the other. Now, the clock starts ticking. The victim's family is legally and morally obligated to kill a male member of the murderer's family. Not the women, not the children under a certain age. There were strict rules of engagement, but any adult male was fair game. Once the victim's family achieved their revenge, the ledger was not wiped clean. Oh no, the ledger just flipped. Because now, the family of the original murderer has lost a son, and their honor requires them to kill a member of the first family. It became a perpetual motion machine of grief. I am not making this up. People genuinely lived like this, and in some remote corners of the world, they still do. Under the Kanun, the only way a targeted man could survive was to lock himself inside his home, or retreat to a specific stone building called a kulla, a blood feud tower. These towers have thick stone walls and tiny slits for windows. Once a man stepped inside, his enemies could not touch him. The rules of the Kanun forbade killing a man inside his sanctuary, but he could never leave. There are documented cases of Albanian men spending 30, 40, even 50 years locked inside a single stone room. They never felt the sun on their faces again. Their wives and daughters had to work the fields and bring them food, because the women were exempt from the feud. Whole generations of men grew up, lived, and died in the shadows, trapped in a ghost war over an insult that happened before they were even born. Just take that in for a moment. Imagine looking out a narrow slit in a stone wall at a mountain you haven't walked on in 3 decades, all because your great-uncle once stole a neighbor's sheep. And this brings us to the ultimate problem, the mathematics of annihilation. Revenge, as we established, evolved as a survival mechanism. It was supposed to keep you safe by deterring attackers, but in practice, the blood feud creates an evolutionary paradox. If neither side can ever back down without losing their honor and their deterrence, the feud never ends. Back in the 1960s, the anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon traveled deep into the Amazon basin to study the Yanomami, a fiercely independent indigenous people who lived in a near-constant state of tribal warfare. Chagnon's work was highly controversial, and scientists still argue about his methods, but the raw data he collected on mortality rates shocked the academic world. He found that in some villages, nearly 30% of all adult male deaths were the result of violence from ongoing blood feuds. A third of the men wiped out. Not by disease, not by predators, but by their own neighbors. The triggers were almost always the same: disputes over women, retaliation for a perceived insult, or the belief that a neighboring village had used dark magic to cause a sickness. Once the killing started, it cascaded. Village A raids Village B and kills a warrior. Village B waits 3 months, organizes a war party, and attacks Village A, killing 2 men. Village A makes alliances with Village C, and they burn down half of Village B. If this cycle goes unchecked, the math is brutal and unavoidable. You simply cannot out-reproduce a 30% mortality rate among your adult providers and protectors. The evolutionary software that was designed to protect the tribe has mutated into an autoimmune disease that is actively destroying the host. And we are getting closer to the answer to our question. How did we survive this? Because if every single human culture on Earth possesses this biological hardware, why isn't the entire planet just one giant, smoldering blood feud? But here is the part we don't like to talk about. When we look back at these ancient codes, at the Kanun or tribal warfare, it is very easy to romanticize it. We watch movies where the stoic hero gets revenge for his murdered family, the music swells, the villain falls, and the hero walks away fulfilled. We code revenge as something clean, something honorable. But the reality of the blood feud was not a cinematic climax. It was a suffocating, terrifying grind. It was a child hiding in the dirt while his father's house burned. It was starvation because the men were too afraid to go out and hunt. It was the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion of knowing that anyone you love could be killed tomorrow for a crime you didn't even commit. Humanity hit a wall. Across different continents, across different millennia, entirely disconnected societies all arrived at the exact same terrifying realization. The cycle of blood does not balance the scales. It just empties the world. So our ancestors had to invent a fix. They had to create a technology that could hack our biology. They needed a way to satisfy the screaming evolutionary demand for revenge without actually shedding blood. And the solution they came up with is one of the darkest, most cynical, and most brilliant inventions in the history of human thought. They put a price tag on the human soul. They invented Vergeld, the price of blood. If you look at the earliest written law codes in human history, they are not soaring philosophical documents about justice and equality. They are literally just accounting ledgers for violence. Take the Lex Salica, the law code of the Salian Franks from around the year 500. Or look at the ancient Celtic Brehon laws, or the Code of Hammurabi. They all do exactly the same thing. They establish a menu of suffering. Under the Salic law, if you cut off a man's hand, the victim's family doesn't get to cut off your hand. Instead, you have to pay them roughly 2,000 denarii. If you sever his thumb, that is roughly half the price. If you cut off his index finger, it is slightly less than the thumb, because the thumb is more useful for holding a sword. They calculated the exact economic value of every single body part. And if you killed someone, the price was called the Vergeld, literally mangold or man price. But here is where the chill runs down your spine. The price was not the same for everyone. If you murdered a Frankish nobleman, the fine was massive, 300 solidi, a staggering amount of gold and cattle. If you killed a free commoner, it was 100 solidi. If you killed a slave, the fine was 30 solidi, which, by the way, was the exact same legal fine for killing a good horse or a prime breeding cow. The law did not view the slave as a human being whose life was tragically cut short. The law viewed the slave as damaged property, and the murderer simply had to compensate the owner for the lost agricultural output. This was the birth of the legal system, and you can see exactly what it created. It created institutionalized inequality. If you were a wealthy nobleman with vast herds of cattle, you could literally afford to murder a poor man. You could strike him down in broad daylight, walk over to his grieving widow, hand her a bag of silver or a dozen cows, and the law said she had to accept it. Her blood was boiling, her biological urge for revenge was screaming, but the tribal elders would stand between her and the killer and say, "The price has been paid, the feud is over. If you strike him now, you are the criminal." The poorest people in these societies literally could not afford to be angry. Justice was completely blind to morality. It only saw math. It was a cold, calculated transaction that explicitly stated that some lives were objectively worth more than others. And honestly, I get stuck on this fact every single time. We are taught to revere the law, to see the scales of justice as this sacred pillar of civilization. But the foundation of those scales wasn't built on fairness. It was built on a ransom note. It was built by rich men figuring out exactly how many sheep they had to pay to get away with a crime. But now, sit with this for a moment. Breathe. Look at the whole picture. Yes, the invention of blood money was deeply cynical. Yes, putting a literal financial value on a human life feels disgusting to our modern ears. It offends every moral instinct we have. But look at the alternative. The alternative was the stone tower. The alternative was the 30% mortality rate. The alternative was a grave for the murderer, and a grave for his brother, and a grave for his son, stretching out into eternity until the whole tribe was buried in the mud. The exchange of wealth for blood was a miracle. It was the first time in the history of our species that a human being stood over the body of someone they loved, looked at the person who killed them, and instead of choosing the knife, chose a compromise. They swallowed the bitter, burning acid of their own biology. They took the cows, they took the silver, and they let the killer walk away. Not because they forgave them, not because they loved them, but for the sake of the children who were still alive. They chose the future over the past. This is the incredible, heavy truth about human civilization. Civilization is not natural. Civilization is an artificial constraint we placed on ourselves because our natural state was too expensive to maintain. Every single courtroom today, every civil lawsuit, every fine you pay for a broken contract or a damaged fence is just a highly stylized, evolved version of trading cows for a life. When you sue someone for damages today, you are participating in a 50,000-year-old truce. We created the law to act as an exhaust valve for our own primal rage. We built a machine to process our vengeance so we wouldn't have to carry it in our own hands. And it is sad, in a way, that justice is basically just commercialized revenge. But it is also deeply, profoundly beautiful, because it proves that we are not entirely slaves to our biology. We are the only animals on Earth capable of looking at our own destructive instincts and saying, "No, the cycle ends with me." So let's go back to that car. You are gripping the steering wheel. The guy who cut you off is speeding away. Your heart is pounding, the adrenaline is flooding your system, and the ghosts of 1,000 ancient ancestors are whispering in your ear, demanding that you chase him down, demanding that you balance the scales, demanding blood. But you don't. You take a deep breath, you loosen your grip on the wheel, you let the anger wash over you, and then you let it pass. You don't chase him, you don't demand blood, and you don't even demand cows. You just put on your turn signal, and you drive safely home. It is the same traffic and the same annoying driver, but now you know what is actually happening in that silence. You aren't just letting it go. You are honoring the oldest peace treaty in the history of the human race. Next time you feel that flash of pure rage over a minor slight, tonight, I want you to remember the stone towers, and remember what it actually cost our ancestors to learn how to walk away. And I have a question for you, genuinely. Think about the last time someone deeply insulted you or wronged you in a way you couldn't legally punish. Did the urge for revenge ever really fade, or did you just learn to suppress it? Tell me in the comments. I read these, and I am endlessly fascinated by how we all manage this ancient hardware we carry around. If this video made you look at your own anger or the concept of the law with completely different eyes, consider subscribing and joining the channel. We take ordinary things here and peel back the layers until the whole world looks new again. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.